This episode is made possible by NetSuite by Oracle and Brex, the AI-powered spend platform.
Hi, this is Waylon Chan, CFO of Grafana Labs. You're listening to the CFO Thought Leader podcast.
This is episode 1023.
We do QBRs, quarterly business reviews with our customers. We focus on-time performances of the motor carriers we select, on-time delivery, on-time pickup. We look at those type of nature. We look at the claim ratios now. How bad are we doing from a claim perspective of that? And even taking some of those claims ratios and saying to the Mr. Customer, hey, if you would change up your packaging a little bit based on the recommendation of the motor carriers, we may be able to save you some cost, save you some expense, and save you actually wasted goods. Folks change just from those numbers to really a more holistic approach on the customer.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we speak with Doug Potvin, CFO of Trinity Logistics. Doug Potvin's CFO career journey began at the National Marine Fishery Service, where Potvin tells us he gained invaluable experience in loan origination and financial analysis. Despite the security and stability of his government job, Potvin felt increasingly constrained by micromanagement. Seeking greater autonomy and a desire to directly impact business operations, Potvin pivots to the private sector and joins a family-owned seafood company as its controller. And so, whereas some CFO journeys began in high-rise office buildings, CFO Doug Potvin's began under the sea. We'll begin after this. 37,025-1. These are the three numbers to remember to get the visibility and control you need to make the right business decisions instantly. 37,000. That's the number of businesses which have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, streamlining accounting, financial management, inventory, HR, and more. 25. NetSuite turns 25 this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days, not weeks, and drive down expenses. 1. Because your business is one of a kind, you should get a customized solution for all of your KPIs in one efficient system and with one source of truth. Manage risk, get reliable forecasts, and improve margins. Everything you need, all in one place. Right now, download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist designed to give you consistently excellent performance, absolutely free, at netsuite.com/KPI. That's netsuite.com/KPI. Hello, we're speaking with Doug Potvin, CFO of Trinity Logistics. Doug, welcome.
Well, thank you, Jack, and thank you for having me. Looking forward to our discussion.
Yeah, so Doug, we begin always by asking our guests to look back in time. And we want you to take us back and try to identify some of those experiences you had that you feel best prepared you for this role. What comes to mind?
Well, Jack, it's interesting. I had no desire to be in the finance or accounting world or what I'm doing currently now. Actually, when I was in high school, I got hooked on technology, and this is back to 84, 85. My mom's a school teacher. She brought home her computer, TRS-80. I spent all night working on it, programming it. I said, wow, this is cool. I want to be involved in this technology. And so when I went to college, I actually went to college to be a computer science programmer. I wanted to get in there and teach programming or learn programming, be able to use technology to better improve situations of various customers or things of that nature. And so get to college and start that process. And in the second year, I took a corporate finance class. And I said, wow, this is pretty cool. This is a little bit different. I got a known for numbers. It was a math computer science major, and I got a known for numbers. I said, this is pretty cool. And I decided at that point in time to actually overload every semester thereafter with additional classes, and ended up getting a computer science math major, well as a business major and a minor in economics, all within 4 years. And during the summers, I happened to work for the United States government and the National Marine Fishery Service, and they were providing guaranteed financing out into the seafood industry. And so it was a combination of that, working at the government, that sort of began to open myself to loan. I mean, they're doing loan guarantees, so they're doing everything a bank does, with the exception of actually floating the money. We did the United States guaranteed bond. We floated that into the marketplace. So just that interaction during those summer interns got me interested into the seafood industry. It got me interested into looking at finance, but also at the same time keeping my interest in technology. Going throughout all that process, how better use technology to develop some of the tools that we're using for the loan originations and such going forward.
Wow, interesting. So already all these components that are such a big part of the finance function today, you were already sort of had an acquaintance with. What happens? Where do you land first?
Yeah, so I do that for 3 summers. Before my senior year, they offered, and I went to a very small school. I went to Bridgewater College outside of Harrisonburg, Virginia. Total enrollment about 850 students at the time. And I met my wife there, and she actually became an accountant. She actually became a CPA in that nature. So before my senior year, the National Marine Fishery Service offered me a full-time job, and realizing to the small college I was going to, it's not like people were knocking down my doors looking to hire me or anything of that nature. In fact, this was the only offer I had. Not that I went out looking, but I knew I already had the offer, so it made my senior year a little easier. So I started with the National Marine Fishery Service in Washington, D.C., and I was a loan origination officer, basically meaning packets would come in from our regional offices, loan packets. I would review those, review the spread to financials, and see whether or not, and make recommendations to the loan committee as to whether or not we should proceed with that financing. So it's very intense. And again, it's just, I love numbers and being able to understand those numbers. That's what drove me to say, hey, is this a good financing? Is this worth the risk to the federal government and to the taxpayers?
And who are the people you're reporting to? Are they general managers or are they finance types, let's say?
They are finance types, very small. So we had the loan origination officers. We had senior directors, regional officers who oversaw the various offices. And the National Marine Fishery Service had loan originations in Seattle, Los Angeles, California, Boston, Massachusetts, and down in Tampa, Florida. They would originate in there. There were 2 different regional directors at the time, and then there was a supervisor in charge, or the chief of the entire financial services division that we were involved in. And we would put those together. I'd report to the regional director what I thought, and then we'd report to have a loan committee, myself and the director and the chief, and discuss whether or not we wanted to proceed with the financing. Looking at all aspects of it, not just whether the loan was good, but we also held collateral. This, unlike the SBA, was actually 100% financing. So the bank or the investor who bought the bond, if the person should default and not make a payment, all they would do would submit that bond back to us. We would pay off the 100%, and then we would go collect from the debtor.
So you are a U.S. government employee?
That is correct, yes.
And you remained there for how many years? And were you considering building a career in government at any point in time?
Yeah, so actually my father was a teacher within the Department of Defense down at Quantico High School. And so I knew about the benefits associated with, understood the benefits associated with, and I said, hey, this could be a position where, hey, you get to that 35, 40 years, you get the pension, you get the automatic health insurance and everything else associated with it. And so I thought there's a possibility of that, and that's how my trajectory went. So I started at the headquarter office down in Silver Spring, Maryland. And from there, after about a year and a half, and this was the whole purpose, was to move us out into regional offices. So after a year and a half in the Silver Spring, I moved out to a regional office located up in Gloucester, Massachusetts. And in Gloucester, Massachusetts, in that regional office, we actually went out and met with now the fishermen, met out and went with the shoreside facility owner operator. We actually did some funding for aquaculture. And so I spent 3.5 years there and really got an understanding of what questions needed to be asked of the owners of the company, what we were looking for with regard to collateral, how to investigate that collateral. Got an understanding meeting with the research scientists, what the stock of the fishery or scallops or clams or something of that nature were all about. So really a well-browned now knowledge beyond just the numbers, but now what's the story behind the numbers, right? So from there, it was about 3.5 years, and from there I got promoted to be in charge of the largest office. So this is about 4 years in, so I'm about 27. We go over to, I move out to Seattle, Washington. Took my wife and my son, who was only 6 months at the time. I moved out to Seattle, Washington, and we're in charge of the regional office there that had a portfolio over in excess of $100 million in loans, including the largest group at that point in time was Arctic Alaska, who was eventually bought by Tyson. That came back to Arctic Alaska. Anyway, and we got involved in the tuna fleets down in Southern California and such. So just, again, it was nice. And now I'd gotten the opportunity to begin to lead people.
Curious what you're thinking career-wise. It seems like it's been a rewarding career to date, and you're why not? What is the next threshold for me? What makes you look elsewhere finally?
Well, that's an interesting question because, again, when I got to Seattle, I said, hey, this is like a great position to be in. I could see myself doing this for quite some time. But then what ended up happening is that I began to feel micromanaged by the people in Washington, D.C., who I knew well, but a lot more questions, a lot more questioning of what I was doing and stuff of that nature. So it got to be, we'd have conference calls, and it felt like a battle. It really did, just back and forth to what was happening in that nature. And I said to myself, and this is the honest truth, I said, why be miserable 3,000 miles away from home when I can be miserable closer to home? And so at that point in time, that's when the switch began to occur in me. And I said, okay, so what opportunities will I have? And I said to myself, well, you know what? There's people that we provided financing to back on the East Coast, closer to home. And I said, you know what? I'm going to give a couple of those a call and find out and just see if anyone had any interest in talking with me, because some of those are the ones I developed. In fact, I was responsible for originating the largest on the East Coast, about a $9 million to a clam company on the eastern shore of Virginia. And so that was the impediment for the move, was the simple fact that it was not going the way I expected it to go. And I figured this was a time, an opportunity to make a jump, make a transition, realizing I may have been relieving the security blanket of the government. And I understood that. But I also stood from the government the simple fact that once you get there a certain period of time, the ability to go get a job outside of the government becomes a little bit more difficult, because you're stereotyped, regardless of how hard you've worked, what successes you've had, you've been stereotyped to being a federal government worker. And, sometimes in the marketplace, it's not well respected for the work they do.
I don't want to tip your hand here, but I know you joined a seafood company. Where, though, in the finance function will you be?
Well, the interesting thing about that is I came to join, it's a family-owned operation, mother, father, son. The mother had basically been running the books of the company. Unfortunately, she had been diagnosed with cancer, been out for a little bit of a while, and they just lost their what I would say an assistant controller, someone very well in the book burst. She ended up actually going to work for the county government in the educational system. And so it came out, and they're located on the eastern shore of Virginia called Mapsville, Virginia, and very rural area. And when I say rural area, there were people who worked in the production lines back with the shucking of clams, canning of clams, and pre-fried, who actually still live in houses that didn't have any running water. And this is back in 1994, 95. So just to give you an instance of what the rural environment was. And so that's where I found myself. And I found myself in a situation where they needed somebody, and they had an experience with me, got to know me during the time of the loan originations, and ended up, that's what decided to do.
Now you're stepping into a much more accounting-oriented role. It's different, and actually, it's skill sets that are going to be challenged, I would think. However, the company being the size it was, you could come up to speed, I would think. Or how would you characterize it?
Yeah, no, it's so the company itself is about $25 million in sales, but it was not just one company. This company was completely vertically integrated. At the time, they owned fishing rates for the clam and quahog industry. They owned vessels. They owned dock facilities in Virginia and New Jersey. So it's completely vertically integrated, and then the production facility in Mapsville, Virginia. And because of my knowledge back in the seafood industry, particularly not seafood industry, federal government working on their financing, I'd gone down there and did the interview. So I knew a lot about the company itself, right? And then I said, okay, let's go in there and take a look at what this is. And the first day on the job, unbelievably enough, the lady came up to me, the owner's wife, Mary, and said to me, hey, I want you to read this. And she handed me a binder. She said, we're getting ready to begin our renewal process. She handed me a binder, probably about 4 inches thick, with all the insurance policies. And so I spent my time reading through that portion of it. She'd also told me, and tells you about a little bit where they were from a financial standpoint, $25 million company, various companies, don't get me wrong. But at that point in time, and this is back in 1990, 1980, 1999 is when I came to, 1994, excuse me, is when I came to join them. They said they had spent, imagine this $25 million company, $100,000 with accountants, not for review, just reviewed statements. So we're not even talking audited statements. And the reason why so much time was spent is the number of journal entries that had to be made to get there. So they had an accounting system in place, but now what it took for a simple fact of the matter is to understand the numbers and going through all that. First thing I did once the numbers started involved in the number, I called the accounting company. I told them, hey, can you guys come up and spend several hours with me? And they did. And they came up, and what we did is we went through the entire closing process on these various companies so I could understand the journal entries, the rationale behind them, what was making them all up in that nature. Second thing is they'd already done costing. They knew what the cost of the product was. So I already had that to my benefit. Now I'm responsible for it, but at least I understood they already had some formula spreadsheets already created for that. And then it becomes just intuitive in nature. I'd taken accounting classes because that's part of the business major back at Bridgewater. So I'd taken accounting class and I'd taken a cost accounting class. So it was one, I was never, I'd never doubted myself. There was not that moving from the government here that I thought of any risk, honestly, making that transition.
And you stay with the company for how long a stretch is it then?
I am with the company for 10 years. I come on board as a controller. And then again, his mother, father, son was the entire executive team. And we would have monthly meetings. I'd be invited. The plant operations was flat. There was not a plant manager. They had line leaders associated with it, right? And so I originally started as a controller, but in 10 years, I'd become general manager. And the rationale before that is simply I came in to do the books, but by the time I left, I was doing the vast majority of anything else there, running HR, involved in all the unemployment claims, legal issues, contract reviews. Wait, one of the best things of us, I was in charge of the farming operations. And you say, hey, what are you in farming operations? I thought you were in seafood. We had 500 acres. That's how we got rid of the wastewater. We would spray the wastewater on the corn, the soybeans, and the wheat. And so I was ultimately involved, responsible for seed, contracting to sell the product, advising when we should harvest. I didn't drive any equipment, but did all that in the farming aspect. And then with regard to the plant, the son and myself, we probably spent conjunctively, together collaboratively ran the plant. The only thing that I never got involved in down there was sales, but everything else I touched in one way or the other. The son was very smart in technology, so he took care of the networking and things of that nature. But I always found fascinating with the technology. Again, how do we automate what we're doing? How do we better do the spreadsheets? How do I get better so that what we're doing from that standpoint. But yeah, so I went from controller managing the books to general manager and having a touch and a good understanding of just about everything else going on at the plant.
And again, just so far, two organizations that probably could not be more different, one government entity and one a family-owned company. You felt comfortable in both areas. You stayed as long as you did with both. Am I right about that? Or how do you look at it when you...
Yeah, I felt comfortable in both. I mean, I grew up with the federal government, right? I was there for the summers. I was there for 6.5 years. I felt comfortable with the government. Just a simple fact, the job was not going the way that I thought it was going to go. And I didn't see the other thing that I realized about the government job. I'm in the National Marine Fishery Service, who is responsible for protecting the resources, the fishing resources. But yet I work for a division that is financing the seafood industry to go out and kill this resource. So I knew my future within the National Marine Fishery Service was going to be limited. The ability to get another role somewhere else and grow up there. You'd have to go to the SBA or some other type of financing lending arm to get a position. I really wasn't into much of that. And so the job changed, but I felt very comfortable there. I mean, like I said, it's stable. You know you're getting a paycheck, everything's fine. But I also knew that the opportunities were going to be limited. And so realizing I wanted to get back home so that my son, for one reason, would be able to spend some time with his grandparents. And I'm glad I did, because my father ended up developing Alzheimer's within 5-6 years. And, and he, for who he was, he would have loved the grandkids, just never got it. My son knew who he was and spent some time with him. But,
yeah, nice.
But, but anyway, so that was a benefit. That was a gift from God that actually this all occurred. And then moving into a family-owned operation, again, now at least I'm in a controller, so I know how they're actually doing financially, right? So there's not a question with regards to the strength of the company. And I knew what it was before I even took the role. So again, it wasn't a question of whether they were stable or not or successful. I already knew all that. So some of that I had a little bit inside information to say when we moved there. And then working into the family-owned business, what you have is you realize you don't have a lot of bureaucracy, especially in the small family-owned operations. Me and the owners, and we're making decisions, and we're moving forward. And the biggest thing is simply trust. Trust in any type of relationship, trust with the financial picture, the numbers are correctly, but trust in the dealings with people. Because once you violate that trust, you're going to be questioned on everything you do. And if I ever violated the trust of the owners, wherever I am, I would have to leave, because, again, I'd be useless to them on that nature. So trust is probably the biggest point in this game, and in any relationship, especially in a financial role, especially when you read about investment and everything else of that nature on there. I prided myself on making sure the books were checked, double checked, and the accountants came in and everything was good in that regard.
Is it from this seafood company that you moved to Trinity Logistics, and where you step into a CFO role, or was there another stop on the career ladder?
No, and the reason why I left the seafood company didn't have to do with them wanting me to leave or me wanting to leave. It wasn't that. It was a simple fact of the matter: the company is being sold.
Oh, yeah.
So it's 10 years there, being sold to a company up in Milford, Delaware. And I'll get back to Milford, Delaware in a little bit with you, because it's an interesting story if you figure Milford, Delaware. But so we're being caught by a company in Milford, Delaware. And what was the problem was that the owners who were selling out everything basically had said, "Hey, Doug, why you come work for us as individuals? We'll give you a year and let you go find another job." And I said, I don't want to do that. And the new owners couldn't tell me exactly where I would fit. They had a controller already. I think they had a desire to keep me, but again, no stated with regard to that. And you got to realize this is the first time, and it's honestly the first time in my life that I wasn't in control of my next step. And for me, stress management was not one of my great strengths back then. In fact, I ended up during this 6-month stage, ended up losing like 50 pounds of weight, just totally, in that regard, because of the uncertainty of the unknown, right, associated with it. And part of what was going on when you ask about the logistics company is that I met the owner of the logistic companies because their accounting company were the same. And the accounting company, knowing we were sold, introduced me to the owner of Trinity Logistics.
Okay.
I met with him in March. We talked, and he said, "Look, I'm looking at selling my company." I said, "You figure out first what you're doing with your company, because I'm not going to go to a company that's ready to be sold again, realizing that this is where I'm headed, right?" And we sold at the end of December. So I met him early on in March, but he sold that to me. I said, so in November, I reached back out to him and he said he decided not to sell, but he also said he was good. He didn't need any help at that point in time. So for 3 months, I went up to Dorchester, New Jersey to work for a clam company as well, who only owned boats and allocation. And he just bought a shipbuilding repair facility. And so I went up there for 3 months, and it was in New Jersey. I was leaving on Monday morning, coming back home Friday, and that's just not what I wanted to do on that nature. And so I ended up, again, family's important to me, so I ended up leaving there. I oddly enough, I sent an email to the owner, Jeff Banning of Trinity Logistics, in June, and I said, "Hey, would you like to talk?" And I got a reply back from him within 5 minutes, and he said to me, "Yes, I would." And Jeff knew me. Both our kids went to the same school and such, so we knew each other. So we responded that quickly, talked to him, and then the movement came about. So it's not like I left the clam company. It was simply it was a choice that for me had to be made because the company was being sold, and I didn't have any clear direction on where the future was.
But this is going to be your segue beyond marine life. Any doubts about that? I guess you must have had such a block of knowledge about that entire industry. And maybe logistics has, Trinity Logistics has customers or interests in that area as well. So I shouldn't jump to conclusions here.
I think the two interesting things about that is actually Trinity Logistics actually arranged freight for us, as well as their sister company actually hauled freight on their trucks for us. So again, I met the brother Daryl Banning before all this, before I even got to meet Jeff. I met him because they were actually moving product for us. Because they're located only up in Seaford, Delaware, which is less than an hour away from where the clam company was. So I got to know them. I think that the shift was, again, I wouldn't question whether I had the ability because I knew I did. The real difference was, though, cost centers, costing, making a product. Trinity Logistics, on the other hand, is simply a service provider in that nature.
Yep.
And so let me tell you a little bit about Trinity Logistics, just so you understand what I'm talking about.
Please do, and I'll pop the question to you so our listeners know where we're at. Tell us about Trinity. What's this company about? What are its offerings today?
Yeah, so Trinity Logistics is what we call a freight broker. We're people-centric and freight solutions, so what we offer in the marketplace and who we call ourselves to be. So what we do is we're the middleman. We're a middleman between shippers who have goods they want to move from point A to point B, and in turn we offer that same freight services to motor carriers who have capacity to move it from point A to point B. And currently, and for 18 years I've been there, we have been in the top 20 of the brokerage firm nationwide, top 20 in that nature. We do approximately 550,000 shipments a year. We've got 450 team members across 7-8 offices within the United States. But we also have 160 independent contractor freight agents throughout the United States, 2 in Canada, 1 in Mexico, a few overseas in that nature. And this job can be done simply with a computer and a phone. So there's nothing we're making. It's simply the services we're providing to what we call our stakeholders, right? Shipper customers, carrier customers, our team members, and our agents. And the communities we find ourselves in, because Trinity Logistics also has a 501c, a foundation that we utilize to benefit the communities we find ourselves in.
Now, back in 2006, and again, when we have a finance leader who's been in the role as long as you have, 18 years, as you just mentioned to us, we'd love to get a sense of how the company has grown during your tenure there. The company you stepped into versus the company today, what can you help us with a comparison?
Yeah, so just a comparison. The company I stepped in today, the owner of the company was an accountant by trade. And he was doing the books. He had a couple of bookkeepers helping him do that. And when he reached out in June, when I reached out to him, such he had an issue and stuff, and he wanted to talk to me, we talked. And so I stepped into the company that had $100 million in sales, doing about 50,000 shipments in that nature. And so when I came on board, the company is much smaller. We have agents. We still have offices, but not as many offices. And it's very small, family-owned type of operation on there. Since that time frame, and I think I want to say from an employee base, we've grown from 100 to 450. The agent side went from 20 now to 160. Into 10 years, our top line revenue has gone from $100 million to $1 billion in business. And the fact of the amount of changes that have taken place over that years to get us where we are has been dramatic, that core nature. I mean, I look at it, really, the focus for us is load count. How many loads are we moving? The second one that we look at is what we call our brokerage, our net revenue. What's the margin that we're making between the difference between what we're charging the customer and what we're paying the carrier? And those two numbers haven't changed over the course of the years. But our focus has always been on one thing. And you got to realize this is a competitive industry. There's over 8,000 of Trinity Logistics throughout the United States doing the same exact thing, hooking up shippers with motor carriers. We realize the only differentiation that we have is our service. We are focused on customer service and we're focused on our team members. And I say that just to say, here's our purpose. Improving lives and supply chains by solving tough problems. First two focus there is improving lives. We want to improve the lives of our team members, our agents, our customers, and our carriers. And you figure a single transaction we do, we got affecting our team members, our agents. So you got 400, 500, 600 people there being affected just by that one shipment. And let's say we're moving it for a customer has 2,000 employees. Well, that's 2,000 employees now that we're just touched as well. We got a motor carrier that's either got a single family owner operated and that's it, versus maybe a fleet of 5 or 10 or even a whole fleet. So you're affecting some people there. And then the goods actually being moved to the end markets, affecting the lives of those people buying the consumers, and anyone who provided the raw material to the customer of us who's actually shipped it. So when you think about it, you got a touchability of touching anywhere from 1,000 lives to 100,000 lives just with one single transaction. We do 550,000. So it's proving lives by doing what? Solving the supply chain problems. Tough supply chain problems come our way, and making sure that we can meet the needs of our customer as well as the customers depending on that product at the delivery point.
We spend a lot of time speaking to finance leaders these days about sort of the customer relationship and their visibility into it. As you just emphasized, this is your competitive advantage, that customer service, ability to serve your customers in an optimal way. Over time, are there new measurements or ways that you've acquired to study the customer relationship and understand what's a healthy customer relationship versus, something that sends off signals saying there could be problems coming here? I don't know. What are your lines of sight into those relationships?
Back a couple of years ago, probably 4 or 5 years ago, we wanted to become a sales-focused culture, right? And you got to realize when I first came on board, back in 2006, when I came on board, 2006, 18 years out, 2006, there's no marketing department, or very little of a marketing department. It's not like our name was getting out and such. So as we've grown, we've continued to emphasize and put ourselves out to the marketplace. Even to the last 5, 6 years, Trinity Logistics is probably the best kept secret within the 3PL industry. Just because we weren't as a C.H. Robinson or a TQL that had much more name recognition, because we did it quietly. We serviced very well, but we stayed in that top 20 ranking. That has changed. So the point of the matter is that we do QBRs, quarterly business reviews with our customers. We focus on-time performances of the motor carriers we select, on-time delivery, on-time pickup. We look at those type of nature. We look at the claim ratios now. How bad are we doing from a claim perspective of that? And even taking some of those claims ratios and saying to the Mr. Customer, hey, if you would change up your packaging a little bit based on the recommendation of the motor carriers, we may be able to save you some cost, save you some expense, and save you actually wasted goods on that nature. So a lot of focus has shifted to be on the customer base, simply giving them invisibility. We got a portal they can go into, look and see what the shipments are of that nature. But the focus is simply, and for our carriers, how do we help them eliminate deadhead miles? So they're not traveling all over the place and such to get the next load on there. Look at it ahead in our loads that we're doing and such. So the focus is not just, the focus changed just from those numbers to really a more holistic approach on the customer. Looking at our costs, right? We try to look at our costs based on where percentage do we want to be with regard to that margin. And you got to realize this margin shifts. dramatically. During the COVID season, supply chains all disrupted and everything else. As I like to say, we bent, but we didn't break. We still provided the trucks that we needed to make sure the customer stuff, the small fleet for us, the 1, the 2, the 3, the 5, the 10 carrier fleet, they were there. They were working in that COVID type of situation. And we had a COVID high, COVID bubble, and the margins were like this, carriers making all good money and stuff. And then when obviously 2022, 2023, the pandemic releases, people go back to that and things work themselves out. We come back to a more normal type of nature. So we focus on maintaining the cost of this really well. Looking to focus on that. We look at right sizing the sales force. I think what Trinity Logistics has done, looking at the various facets that we do, how we spend our money. When people came off the COVID high or the COVID bubble burst, you read in the paper about the simple fact brokerage firms cutting back on employees, laying off people. In fact, Convoy, who was a digital freight management company, went under. A couple other brokers went under because they took that elevated AR, using that to finance a line of credit that they spent on other stuff, that when all of a sudden that started coming back down, they were in trouble. But we didn't go through any of that because of the management of this company. I mean, our entire executive leadership team, we get along very well, and we all understand how operations affects the numbers and how the numbers should be viewed by operations on that nature. And that was probably the biggest thing. What we've looked at is simply we want to make sure that everyone's well grounded in what the numbers are saying.
Again, I'm fascinated by this notion that over the last 18 years, a $100 million company, roughly $1 billion company today, you were really the primary architect of this finance function that grew up with the company. And all along the way, you had to make choices. And we're led to believe we go to all those conferences, the changing role of the CFO and how they're using their resources differently and where they're betting this year versus last. I mean, as you architected and built this framework for to deploy your finance professionals, can you tell us whether milestones, as you look back, was it, okay, that's when we did that. That's when we added that FP&A function. That's when we went to the cloud. I don't know what the milestones would be in your mind, but that's what I'd love to learn about. When you
when you look back at, to be honest with you, Jack, it's an 18-year career, so it's all blur. Personally, right till today, right? But I think the focus for me has always been drive technology. So I actually led the technology group at Trinity for about 2.5 years. And from a technology standpoint, what we did is we had phone systems were on premise. We had no redundancy in what we were doing, right, with regard to that. And so we changed everything. In that role, the IT group did a tremendous job. We all of a sudden went to redundant circuits in all our buildings. The second thing is we moved our phone system into the cloud. The other thing we did is look at simply, hey, we were already in the cloud with regard to our technology, our brokerage system. So we knew putting the phone system into the cloud, putting the computer so that you get there, being able to do online technology, and the fact that we got redundancy. The other thing we did is we implemented the change, and this is the reason why I want to share this with you, is because this is how a finance person can impact it outside of just a finance role in the technology piece. We moved from, and people thought I was crazy. They said, why are we going to spend a couple $100 more? And we moved from desktop systems to laptops. And when we did all that, I remember getting a call from Frank Lees out in our Kansas City office. It was during a snowstorm out in Kansas City. And he said, Doug, I don't know what it is. Only half the office is in here, and it's awfully quiet, but we are having a great day. Because the technology allowed us to continue to not miss a beat. And the reason why that's big in the brokerage industry is because our customer, if we can't get a hold of us, guess what? He's calling the CH Robinson. He's calling the TKL. He's calling any one of those other 8,000 people to get his product moved because that's what he needs. He needs the product moved. So we elevated the technology piece. So that's one piece. But the reason why I mention that is, I know the question you asked me. The reason why I talk about, though, it's critical. It's critical as a CFO that you can see an overall picture of the entire organization, right? And be influential in that nature. With regard to what we did from an accounting standpoint, we're still in the same system. We're in the same Sage 100 system that we've been in since I've been there in 18 years. We have developed our finance department. You can say this, hey, this is a 550,000 shipments. You got $1 billion in sales. How many people actually in a finance role? 4. So what we did is we looked at it and said, hey, let's automate every type of functionality that we can in our finance system. We had our payments going to a lockbox, so we got the lockbox file now coming in, keyed by them, coming in, so cash applications like that. 2 years ago, we did the same thing with ACH. So we get about $2 to $3 million of payment a day from various vendors. And you got to realize these transaction sizes are only from $1,000 to $3,000, 550,000 of them. Our cash application is done within 4 hours on a daily basis. The only thing left for us to do is when the customer hasn't sent a remittance, or a remittance is for a statement, it's just a statement number, not the individual invoices. So we've automated all that. We automated our travel expenses through Certified to get those coming into the system. Payroll, so it's coming in automatically. We don't do a daily journal entry. Everything is automated to the most that we can then. So that was a big change that we did from that perspective. We changed the way in which we build our customers. So just one of the things we did is simply change the way in which we pay our billers. We had a group of 15 billers. We changed the way we pay. We went from hourly rate to a piecemeal rate. And we believe we went from 150 bills a day to 350 bills a day by one person. And that was just changing the rate and automating a little bit in the system, but mostly by changing rate. So we went from 15 people down to 9 people in that department. The way we looked at collections, we changed the way in which we did collections. We went from simply, I had a credit department and I had a collection department. And I interviewed a guy and he said, well, we just roll them all together. And I started thinking about that. If you got a credit department, the credit department's usually going to ask the collector, how's that guy doing? And this way we mirrored them together. And again, reduced the cost associated with it, but improved our collection delinquency. Our delinquency rate is less than 4%. In that nature, and we're talking as $1 billion. You can figure out what the AR total is on that type of nature. So a lot of the changes that we've made had to do with technology, had to do with bringing in different technology. The budgeting process, FP&A, we started in probably 2015. We now do that manually. We're getting ready to automate that in a couple of years. But right now, to the detail level we go. We do $0 budgeting, so we start fresh every year. We got 40 spreadsheets now we're doing. That's how detailed we get to the individual cost centers, individual profit centers, and begin to roll it all together. So we've got a good indication of where we're going to be. And we look at it every month. We go through our budgeted versus angel like everyone else does. But the process has changed over the 18 years to incorporate all of that, which has been accomplished to where we are now. And our goal is from a back end side of it, because it's a pennies game for us, is that we want to grow exponentially and the costs grow laterally.
What about sales? Are you collaborating more than you were 10 years ago? I would imagine you are, but can you give us a sense of, and I think you mentioned back at the seafood company, sales was one area that you didn't touch.
Yeah, no, we are collaborating more with the sales, particularly on the a couple things, on the way in which we clear our leads for individuals, the way in which we give the initial credit. I look at it, you got to realize, so we got 6,000 customers, and you got to begin the first transaction, maybe $1,000, $1,500. I mean, we're not talking thousands, tens of 20 or $30,000 for one transaction. And so we changed the way in which we were doing our credit. And one of the things we did, and this is a collaboration, because I heard, hey, you guys you're not allowing us to do some of these opportunities. So we changed it up. We simply said, look, we're going to look at the D&B, whatever they recommend, we're going to put a floating tiered schedule associated with it. And so now 90% of our customers will get initial credit between $5,000 and $25,000. Sales guy can know he can go out and get that business. He knows that right off the start. When the lead's entered, we give him, hey, this is a good customer. It's up to 25,000 credit. Go ahead. He's got 5,000. Go ahead. You go get that load from him. The only 5% are still ones that are prepaid, and we just got to get more information because D&B says, I got no recommendation. I've only recommended $1,000. So that has improved the speed at which a customer knows, or the salesperson knows, he can go after that customer from that regard. The interesting thing is that we collaborate more in the fact that we're talking to those customers in collections. We're involving the AM, our account manager. We're involving our business development representative in those calls as well, so that they know exactly what's going on with that. We're collaborating with them so that I tell our collectors, we're not going to shut off an account. The only way we shut off an account, the guy says, I got cash flow problems, I can't pay you. But most of the time, that's the only time we'll react when we don't notify the account manager. Most of the time, the account manager is working with us to collect money. He's well aware of the situation. And what would you say maybe in other companies are difficult conversations to have? It's not in this regard. And when we talk about the people person, I challenged our collectors. I want you to do two things. One, I want you to call 3 different account managers, 3 different agents a month, and tell me a little bit something about them personal. And also ask the accounts payable staff on the other side of our customers who are paying us the same exact question. And we spend 2 Fridays every month, one talking about the AMs and one talking about the AMs and agents, their relations there, and one talking about the AP people at our customers. And I enjoy those conversations probably more so than anything else because it's a blast hearing what they've learned about the customer, about the individual. I got a person that got 3 dogs. As soon as they get someone on the other hand that has dogs, man, they hit it off. So really from a sales effort, it's more collaboration. I'm actually an executive sponsor on some of these accounts. I actually will be involved in sales calls, getting them not only a position of what we do and how we do it, but also saying, you've got a great operations team here. We've got a premier heavy haul office up in Minnesota. Premier. And I get the chance to talk to some of these customers when we're talking about contracts. And I tell them, hey, I've got a policy I've had for 10 now going on 12 years, cargo policy worth $1 million, right? One claim. It just tells you about the operational success they're having. I think it adds credibility to add the finance group on some of these sales calls anyway, to talk a little bit more besides just, hey, we're going to move from A to B and that's it, right? There's some of that nature on there.
Well, great detail there for us. So thank you for that, Doug. We're running long, and I apologize. We've been enjoying speaking with you. We are up to our finance strategic moment question, where we're going to ask you just for one moment of strategic insight and call it an aha moment in the world of podcasting. I think often that's what they call it. But a moment of insight that you experienced along the way that made you perhaps look at the world a little differently. Anything come to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
Yeah, the finance strategic moment for me occurred while I was working for the Fishery Service. And you say, well, Doug, you weren't even in the role of a controller or CFO. You weren't doing anything in finance. You're looking at loans. Why would that be a strategic moment for you? Well, because we go out and we talk to the controllers of these various entities, small family-owned type of businesses and such, right? And I begin sitting there and asking them questions because I'm a curious person to begin with, but asking them a question about the business, asking them a question about the numbers. 75% of the time, you know what I was told? You need to talk to the owner. You need to talk to the owner. You need to talk to the owner. And it hit me there. And I said to myself as I was progressing at this thing, and as I begin to think about moving on from the federal government to another opportunity, I said to myself, I will never be in that position where I've got to tell someone who comes ask me about a company that I lead the financial direction in that you got to go talk to the owner. And what that broadened my knowledge is simply anybody who's got an accountant CPA degree sits in a role I can do, a controller, whomever, can put together numbers. It's not the issue. The differentiation between a solid CFO, a solid finance person, is the ability to tell the stories behind a number. So you can affect change, you can influence possibilities, you can have a much larger say at the table than if you simply said, say, here's a number. And because of that influence you build with having knowledge across the board, it's what's powerful within this evolving CFO role. It's more than just finance. Talk about technology, talk about sales. We talk about a whole host of human resources I'm involved in, right? A whole host of possibilities there, but you've got to understand numbers. You got to understand business. You got to put yourself outside of that role. I'll be honest with you. If someone wanted me to hire me just as a CFO, I wouldn't take the job. The title may be CFO, but what I'm looking for is from whomever I'm interviewing, what are the opportunities there actually to be involved in the company to help the company grow beyond just here are the numbers. So, you asked me the strategic, that for me was the eye-opener, the simple fact. I wanted to do more. I didn't want to be sitting behind a desk doing numbers. I want to be out talking to people. I want to impact lives. I want to be beyond just that role of that position. And that was, for me, the moment that really opened my eyes to who I am today, how I developed over the course of my career. And that seafood company, I had every hat imaginable that anyone would have in any role in the company with the exception of sales. And getting the vision of that just it just whetted my appetite to do more.
CFOs and controllers, does expense management feel like a necessary evil? It's time to switch to Brex. Brex automates and accelerates spend management with easy-to-use corporate cards, travel, expense management, and bill pay, all on one AI-powered platform. Brex makes it easy to boost efficiency and compliance enterprise-wide and free up your managers, employees, and accounting team for higher impact work. Top companies from startups to enterprises are using Brex to automate manual work and transform their finance operations. We're talking DoorDash, Robinhood, Airtable, and countless other industry leaders. Ready to join them? Switch to AI-powered spend management at Brex.com.
Excellent. Thank you for that. We're going to jump to what we refer to as our mentoring round, where we'll ask you several quick questions intended to inspire and inform finance leadership. We want you to think back to, was it 2006 when you first stepped in to a CFO role? Again, this was, you were the top finance person for the first time, really. I mean, or you had the title, let's say. There must have been something, what you were just sharing was fascinating because it's a nice segue here, but you got in that role. It must have been something that you were, is that part of this job as well? Something that surprised you, something you perhaps weren't prepared about. In fact, we'll let you go back in time and just give yourself a heads up, give yourself a piece of advice at that time. What piece of advice might have been useful to you as you stepped in?
I think the useful piece of advice that'd be is simply, you got to realize you're working with other people, right? I have been known to be direct, and I don't want to say this because I don't want to stereotype CFOs, but some people call them direct, dull individuals, not personal or anything of that nature. And what I've come to realize over the 18 years at Trinity Logistics, and there's a far difference ownership between the seafood company and the others, you've got to be able to get along with people. You've got to be able to respect what the work they're doing. You got to be understanding that they have an opinion as well that matters, and collectively together you can move a company. I think looking back on it, that's what I think that the biggest challenge for me was coming in and realizing I don't have all the answers coming into the logistics company. I don't have all the answers. They're not looking for me to have all the answers, but I thought I needed to deliver more.
We'd like to ask our guests to reflect a little on the personal side for us. Is there something maybe many of your colleagues might not know about you, something outside of work perhaps that you could share with us?
Yeah, I can. I'm also a pastor of a small church in Westover, Maryland. It's the Church of the Brethren, a very small church, about 15, 20 people. In fact, I think my wife and I are the youngest people at the church. But the interesting thing for that means I got called to this church. I'd never wanted to be a preacher pastor. God called me to it. My wife had always said, I don't want to be married to a farmer or a pastor. And I told you about the seafood company farming. So you'd get married to a farmer and then this pastor role. And that also has, I tell you what, a pastor who works a secular job and then preaches on a Sunday, what I've learned over the 18 years, you bring a lot of that stuff into the church with you. But that's where exactly it needs to be heard, is to understand that I'm not any special than anyone else. I face life challenges just as anyone else does. And to recount those stories in front of them.
I mean, how does that happen exactly? Was there a church, and I don't know, all churches are a little different, but is there a church council that you were part of and they turned to you and said, we need you, this is the time, you're the best person? I mean, how does that happen exactly?
Yes, I grew up Catholic. I married a Church of the Brethren lady, and I figured it was easier to follow her faith based on my faith in that nature. And it wasn't until we actually came to the clam company, again, God's intervention about the family, but God's intervention created a big plan for me. We started going to a church locally to a house we live in, Snow Hill, and this is a church in Salisbury. And we were there a good number of years, and the pastor was a little bit older, and he's taking some time off here and there, and I got an opportunity to begin preaching. And I realized that I thought God had given me a gift in the preaching realm. And this church, our sister church down the road in Westover, was struggling finding a full-time pastor. Hadn't had a full-time pastor in a while. So I remember John Hartman, good guy, great guy. He's since passed, one of my mentors. I asked him one day, I hired him at the clam company to be my farmer, to drive the equipment and everything else. I asked him, do you think your church be willing to take a Catholic-born, non-seminary person to come and preach the word? And he said, I don't know, I'll ask. Well, he asked, and it's been 18 years, just about 18 years at the, in fact, a little bit more than 18 years at the church there. And so it was really a God moment. And I've often said, if they should ever fire me, and they've told me there's a fat chance that's never going to happen, but I said I would never. It's not like I put a resume out. This was not a chosen vocation. This was simply God leading my heart in a direction. Said, I need you at this church, and this is the church I want you to be at until we determine it's time to go. And so it's not. I don't consider it a second job. It's nothing like that. It's simply a calling in my life, and it also has a large influence on how I live.
Can I ask, are you looking to bring in young people into the church? Clearly you would be, but I mean, is that one of the challenges that the church faces?
It's a challenge. It's a challenge across the board in that nature. And I don't begrudge any other churches and stuff. I don't begrudge the large mega churches. I don't begrudge those people who speak a lot of prosperity gospel and such. We're in a very rural area. And it's not to say we don't have some larger churches around. But you got to realize I don't have the budget or the means in which to do something larger in that nature. But what I tell our congregation, and again, it's older people, right? I tell them, look, you're still living for a reason and a purpose. God hadn't taken you home yet because he's not done with you. I said, if we go out and you talk to people and you mention about your faith, you mention about your conviction, and you say to them, hey, come visit, and they don't come visit. But if they go somewhere else to a church, guess what? It's a win. God's not looking you to build your individual church. God's looking you to build a kingdom. So if I talk to a family and they say, hey, yeah, we like it, but we just, you're an older, and then go try this one, Because again, it's about finding a home that you feel secured at. But here's what I also say. If we don't plant the seed, who will? And God calls us just to plant the seed. He says, someone else will water it and I'll bring home the harvest. But I need you to go to plant the seed. So we may never grow, but we are planting seeds. We do a bi-weekly breakfast. Have people come in. They don't show up at church, but guess what? Doesn't matter. We're reaching them at that point in time. And so we're given an opportunity to see our interaction with one another, see how we get along with people. But it's also an opportunity to just reflect and ask them how they're doing. And so I think that's what it is. It's not so much the growth of the individual church, but it's the growth of his kingdom. And if you can be part of that, then you're doing what God's called you to do.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. We always like to ask for a resource, a book, a podcast, something that has challenged your thinking. I don't know. But does anything come to mind when we ask for a book selection or a podcast?
Yeah. It's an interesting thing because I read a lot of books, but a lot of the books are all based on truth. So I read a lot of biographies and things of that nature. But the one that I fall back on is I fall back on two different books. I fall on the John Maxwell when he talks about the lid. Because I guess sometimes we get caught up that says, hey, this individual's been a great individual contributor. I'm sure they can move forward into that leadership role. And what you realize after 6 to 12 months is, no, they can't because they've got a lid. You got a person with a lid of about 6, 7, whatever the case may be. And I'm not criticizing anything here. It's just the nature of it. To get that person from a 6, 7 up to a 10, you're not going to get there. It is just that certain type of level. So I use that in a lot of things, and I end up making the same mistake. I promoted people that maybe I shouldn't have promoted in certain situations. And so that's been a more encompassing book just in the last several years for me, is that there is that law of the lid. And you got to, for me, it means I got to lower some of my expectations of people. And that becomes the key because I know what my expectations are high. But then what happens is people may not meet them and you never thank them for the job they're doing. When in actuality, they're giving it the best. So then I said, you know what? I've got to do more thinking. I got to be more authentic with them, right? And the other thing I learned, and this is just in general, this goes back to the faith and stuff, the ability to say, I'm sorry. I may not have thought I did anything wrong, but that person's perception is their reality. And I'll look back in the situation, I'll say to myself, Doug, you didn't handle that right. That was not in the right context in which you should go say, right? And I say all these things. And then I said, you know what, Doug, you need to go apologize. I'm not going to do that. And the person said, you don't need to do that. No, I do. I do, because the way in which I did it was incorrect. It was wrong. It's not going to impact my life, but it's going to impact theirs because they matter. You get as a leader, you got to make people who are valued, appreciate it, respect it, show empathy. Let them know they matter in the entire course. When you give them a project, just don't drop it on the plate and say, do it. Explain to them why it's so important and why I chose you to do it. You're critical. You're valued. Right? You know, and then the other books that I read, and this has been my whole thing. I don't go to any fictional movies. I don't read any fictional books because there's enough of real world things that have happened over the years that I'm sitting there and I'm just awestruck. And I've said to myself, these are ordinary people who take challenges and risk every day. And the one comes to me is Shackelford down in on the South Pole, and the fact of what he did trying to reach the South Pole, and he lost his ship. He had a crew stayed there. He sailed with 6 people across the Arctic Ocean over to New Zealand, got a crew and all that. But it was just such a challenging exercise. And that's what I look at people who have taken extraordinary risks to get ahead. I don't have the same gumption, but what I do know is through my life, what I do and how I do it and how I approach it, I can impact the lives of many people. So I'm not a dull finance guy. You know, in fact, when I introduce people now, I'm a CFO. And I got to share this real quick. CFO. We were acquired by a company in Milford, Delaware. Trinity Logistics was. That's why I brought back Milford. Acquired by Burris Logistics in Milford, same city. You wouldn't think that happened. Anyway. So they've got a CFO. They got a chief financial officer. So I tell people, I am the CFO. I am the chief fund officer. And that's how I introduce myself. I do it, and it's because our people work so hard. We're going to have fun. And you wouldn't think I would have a lot of fun. I do. I have a lot of fun. I also get stressed out, but I have a lot of fun with them. And so, again, it's the book you asked me about, the fact that I look at focusing on the nonfiction stuff. I look at having fun. I mean, all those influences just all roll about, you know, and it's a lot more simply. When I look back at my parents, if I can be half as good as what they were, I have life beat.
Now, what we always end by asking you to look forward, Doug, and we're curious, what are your priorities for the coming 12 months?
Priorities for the coming 12 months is continue to drive efficiencies in our operations, especially the back-end operation. Again, we want to grow, but we want to make sure we're doing it correctly. The other big thing in the next 12 months for us is how do we combat fraud within the supply chain? Fraud is running rampant. TIA, our Transportation Industry Association, our lobbyists up in Congress, the people we get together that represent 1,500 of us. We just had a report come out just end of last year. Over $1 billion cost in the supply chain because of fraud activity. And these are organized fraud. This is not the guy stealing a truck out of a yard. These are people impersonating brokers, impersonating motor carriers, sending ballot carriers into warehouses to get stuff out and move it 5 miles over and then get someone else to send it overseas or sell it. So that's the real focus for us this 12 months. How do we eliminate fraud from the industry, from what Trinity is facing? We'll never end it. We'll never do it. But how do we reduce it? So our focus is a lot on that because it's costing the industry, costing us, not thousands of dollars, but, hundreds of thousands of dollars to millions of dollars between us and our cargo insurance company. So really looking at fraud's a big piece of that nature. And then the last piece, how do I continue to see our team members and agent grow? Focus on what are their aspirations, what are their goals. And when I say that, it's not just about simply growing as a professional at Trinity Logistics. It's growing in their personal life. So however I can be a mentor in that nature, because I've reached the pinnacle of my success. Do I say that? I say that because no, I feel confident where I am. I've reached that pinnacle. But what I want to make sure my lasting legacy is that other people are able to achieve what they wish to achieve. So if someone said, hey, do you want to see your controller leave? I said, no, I don't want to see my controller leave. However, if he came to me and said, Doug, look, I got an opportunity to become a CFO of a small company here. It's better. I got a chance to improve my life with my family and stuff. And I'd say, Chris, you know what? Go. Enjoy. Have fun. Because I knew I had a part in that. And that's what we want for everyone, to see them succeed and grow as well. And so that's a focus of mine. It's been a focus for a number of years, but really it's something I do every day. I mean, it's improving lives, like we talked about. That's our core purpose, and that's what we want to focus on doing. What I want to focus on doing over the next 12 months, as well as everything else that the finance role subscribes to.
Doug Potvin, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thank you, Jack. Appreciate the time.
Hello, listeners. Jack here. I hope you've been enjoying some of our recent CFO Thought Leader episodes. To better serve you, we need your feedback. And our 2024 listener survey is now live. What do you like about CFO Thought Leader? What don't you like about CFO Thought Leader? This is what we call continuous improvement. We want to serve you better, but we can only do that by hearing from you. You'll find our 2024 survey right on the nav bar at cfothoughtleader.com. To demonstrate our gratitude, survey takers will receive a $10 savings coupon on the purchase of our new book, The CFO 500. Take the survey and the coupon is yours. Please help us serve you better. And as always, thank you for listening.